They came for the view. 40 tourists from different corners of the world, armed with thermal jackets, selfie sticks, and high expectations, stepping off the snowcats and into the postcard-perfect Alaskan lodge. Nestled deep in the Chugach Mountains, the wooden chalet stood like a dream. Large windows, roaring fireplace, and promises of northern lights dancing above them by nightfall. Their guide, a man named Trevor with a square jaw and corporate smile, told them, "Light flurries tonight. Nothing to worry about. Tomorrow we'll hike the glacier trail. Easiest trek of the season." That line would echo in more than one person's head before the night was over. But by 5:14 p.m., the first flake hit the window sideways. By 5:20, they couldn't see the mountains anymore. By 5:35, the world outside had turned into a wall. White, solid, deafening. Wind screamed like it was alive. Snow hammered against the lodge like fists, like punishment. Within minutes, the temperature dropped 15 degrees. The Wi-Fi blinked out, followed by the satellite radio. Then the generator hiccuped. Panic came fast, like heat evaporating from bare skin. "Do we still have signal? My phone's dead. Wasn't it supposed to snow just a little? Where the hell is Trevor?" That's when they realized the guide was gone. Last seen checking the perimeter. He hadn't returned. The mood fractured. Tourists who were strangers an hour ago now turned to one another with suspicion, accusations, and fear masked as anger. "You trusted him. You said this was safe. You think I control the damn weather? Why didn't someone check the forecast themselves?" A man from Chicago tried opening the front door to go look for Trevor. It wouldn't budge. Frozen solid. Another tried calling 911, holding his phone against the window as if proximity might summon a miracle. No bars. No signal. Just the snow. The wind howled louder, drowning out voices. One woman collapsed to the floor, hyperventilating. A young couple argued by the fireplace, blaming each other for choosing this trip. Someone opened the fridge, muttering about rations. And through it all, in the farthest chair by the window, sat an old woman. Still, unmoving, wrapped in a green wool coat that looked older than anyone else in the room. She said nothing, didn't flinch. Just watched the storm like it was an old friend knocking at her door again. No one noticed her. Not yet. Because they were too busy unraveling. The illusion of safety had shattered in under 30 minutes. And outside, the storm only grew louder. Not a snowstorm. Not a squall. A siege. The screaming didn't come all at once. It started as whispers. Frantic, desperate. Then one voice rose, then another, until it all melted into a chorus of panic. People swarmed the windows like trapped birds. They scraped frost off the glass, hoping to see something, anything beyond the wall of white. But the blizzard was a curtain pulled shut over the world. Nothing but snow, thick and angry, battering the panes like it wanted in. Someone ran to the door again. This time, they forced it open a few inches before the wind roared inside like a beast. A man tried to squeeze through, but the cold hit him like a punch. He stumbled back, cheeks already red and frosting. His eyelashes turned to ice in seconds. "You'll die out there," someone yelled. "We can't just sit here," another barked back. "Where is Trevor? Maybe he left us. Maybe you scared him off." Blame became a lifeline, something solid to cling to when nothing else made sense. People turned on each other, loud and sharp. Accents clashed, tempers snapped. There was no signal, no way to call for help, no contact with the outside world. Their phones were just expensive paperweights now. A woman from San Diego shook her phone like it was misbehaving. "This is insane. They promised us safety." A man in a parka checked the generator and returned with bad news. "It's struggling. We've got power, but it's not going to last forever." Someone joked about cannibalism. No one laughed. And through the heat, the fear, and the snowstorm that howled like vengeance outside, there she was, the old woman in the corner. Same place as before. Same coat. Same silence. She didn't move when someone knocked over a chair. She didn't blink when the wind slammed against the walls like it wanted to break through. She sat like she had seen this before. Eventually, someone noticed her. A teenage boy pointed. Why's she not freaking out? A silence settled, sharp and sudden. Heads turned. Eyes landed on her. She didn't react. Just sipped from a thermos. Calm. Deliberate. Like she had all the time in the world. A man with a European accent stepped forward. "Ma'am, are you all right?" She looked up slowly. Her eyes were clear, focused, unafraid. And then, for the first time, she spoke. "I'm just waiting," she said. "Storms don't scare me." The blizzard screamed, relentless. Wind clawed at the windows, and inside, the lodge cracked under the weight of fear. People huddled in clusters now. Some were pacing, others curled up in corners, clutching their coats tighter, like cloth could hold back death. The air was thick with sweat, frost, and panic. Someone was crying quietly. A man was trying to get the fireplace going again with damp wood. The tension wasn't rising. It was boiling. Then the old woman stood up. Slowly. Without rush. As if she were responding to something only she could hear. The room noticed her this time. Not just as the silent figure in the corner, but as something else entirely. Something steady. She stood there, small but upright, her back straight, her eyes sharp as the cold outside. And then she spoke. "This isn't my first storm." Her voice cut through the noise, not loud but clear, like steel on glass. People stopped mid-argument, mid-breath, turning toward her as if pulled by a rope. "Who are you?" someone asked. She didn't answer that. Not yet. She stepped closer to the fire, her boots echoing slightly on the wood floor. Her coat hung loose now, revealing a worn patch on the chest. Faded. Military. Few noticed. But one did. "We are running out of time," she said. "If no one takes control, we're going to start losing people. To cold, to fear, to each other." A young man, jittery and sarcastic, laughed nervously. "Okay, General. Got a plan? Or are we waiting for eagles to come carry us out?" She turned to him slowly, locking eyes. The kind of look that peels away arrogance. "Once," she said, her voice quiet, "I commanded soldiers through a siege. 2 weeks. No power. No backup. I watched boys freeze with rifles in their hands." The laughter died in his throat. "If you don't believe me," she continued, stepping even closer, "you're welcome to test your luck out there." She nodded toward the door. No one moved. "Right," she said. "Then listen up." There was no more panic in the room, only silence, as if the storm itself had paused to hear what she'd say next. She began to speak in measured tones. About rationing heat. About blocking drafts with coats and mattresses. About organizing watches through the night. About saving batteries, conserving body heat, assigning roles. It wasn't barking orders. It was strategy. And one by one, people began to shift. Not quite trusting, but listening. Watching her differently now. Someone finally asked her name. It was the man who'd been quiet since the chaos started, a lean guy in his late 40s with a calm presence and watchful eyes. He hadn't panicked like the rest, just observed. And now, as she drew the first heat map in the condensation on the window with a gloved finger, he stepped forward. "Wait," he said, voice low but steady. "What's your name?" She looked at him, and for a moment her face softened. "Ruth," she said. "Ruth Harrison." Silence fell again, but this time it was a different kind. Not fear, curiosity. The man's eyes widened. "Captain Ruth Harrison?" She didn't answer, just looked at him, almost tired. But that was enough. He turned to the rest of the group, his voice rising slightly, urgent now. "You all have no idea who this woman is." A few skeptical glances. He continued, "I was stationed at Elmendorf in '05. We ran joint drills with her unit. She led Arctic survival teams. One of the only women to ever do it. She pulled 3 men out of a wideout that even base command called hopeless. They called her the Ghost Commander. She knew how to vanish and save you at the same time." Someone scoffed. "That's a little dramatic." "No," he snapped, eyes hard. "It's not." Ruth didn't bask in it. She just turned and started organizing the bedding materials like it was another operation. But the room felt different now. Lighter. Like her name gave them something to hang on to. She saved people? Yes. Survived a siege? Yes. And she's here? Yes. She was here. Ruth Harrison, 72 years old. Built like granite and moving like someone half her age, though her knees popped with every step. Still, not everyone was convinced. Doubt hung in the air like steam off their breath. But most had started following her quiet instructions. She wasn't asking permission. She was giving structure. And structure meant survival. Then someone asked the question everyone had been avoiding. How long can we last? That's when the real tension returned. The fireplace was holding, but barely. The temperature inside was dropping by the hour. Outside, the storm raged on like it had a vendetta. And now, the food. They hadn't packed for survival. This was supposed to be a one-night scenic stay. Cheese trays, trail mix, a few luxury dinner kits that now looked like gold. By sundown, it became clear they had enough food for maybe a day. 2 if rationed brutally. Ruth stood in front of the makeshift pantry, eyes scanning the supplies like she was doing math in her head. She turned to the group. No more meals. Half portions starting now. The protests came instantly. Loud. Predictable. Hungry. She didn't flinch. "Yell all you want," she said. "It won't fill your stomach." The lodge was swallowed by darkness. The wind howled like a beast outside, clawing at the walls and windows, rattling the thin bones of the building. Inside, there was only the sound of nervous breathing, and the crackle of a fire that wasn't enough to fight back the creeping cold. Night had fallen hard. Ruth's rules were followed for now, but there was no denying the growing unease. The air felt heavier, thicker, as if the storm had brought not just snow, but something darker into the lodge with it. And then, a scream. The man had been gone too long. He'd gone out to use the bathroom, a short walk to the outhouse, but he hadn't come back. At first, they all thought it was a joke, a prank. It was just too ridiculous to believe someone had simply disappeared. But then minutes turned into an hour. Then 2. The wind picked up, relentless, gnashing at the world outside. Someone opened the door. peering into the whiteout beyond. They shouted his name. Nothing. Just the roar of the storm. Panic spread like a sickness. Ruth didn't flinch. "We go after him in the morning. He's not in danger yet. We can't risk more lives tonight." But it was too late. The tension had snapped. Some of them, already shaken by the storm, turned their eyes on her, doubt creeping in. "You expect us to just wait?" one man sneered. "What's he? Just a casualty. A number to you." "I'm not asking for your permission," Ruth replied, her voice calm but hard. "I'm telling you what we need to do. We need to stay alive, and panicking won't get us anywhere." But the rift was forming. It wasn't just about missing tourists. It was about control. There were those who believed Ruth's military logic could save them. And then there were others, those who thought they knew better, who wanted to take matters into their own hands. "I'm not dying because of some war strategy," a woman from the group spat. "We need to go out there. We need to find him now." Ruth stood tall, looking at them without flinching. "The storm isn't a choice. You want to go out there, do it. But if you're not back by morning, don't expect me to risk my life trying to pull you out." The tension in the room snapped. Some left, scoffing at her orders, determined to break off and find the missing man themselves. The others, quieter but no less determined, huddled together, clinging to the cold comfort of Ruth's direction. Hours passed, and nothing but the howling wind filled the empty space. It wasn't just the cold gnawing at them now. It was doubt, the fear that grew with every passing minute. They could hear the storm pushing against the walls, rattling the frame of the lodge, threatening to tear them apart. And as the first light of dawn barely began to push through the windows, the group had splintered. The cold gnawed at the bones of the lodge like an insidious predator. The storm outside was a constant roar, pushing and pulling at the walls, trying to claim the building as its own. But it wasn't the storm that was the most dangerous anymore. It was the hunger. Ruth had been right. They weren't going to make it unless they rationed what little food they had left. A few bags of dried fruit, a couple of cans of soup, and some hard crackers. Barely enough to feed 20, let alone 40. She'd given her orders. Half portions. A bite now, a bite later. Stretch it as far as they could. But as the day stretched into night, the tension between the group started to boil over. The hunger gnawed at their insides, sharpening tempers and cutting through any pretense of civility. And then it happened. One of the tourists, a man who had been quietly defiant since the beginning, slipped into the pantry when no one was watching. He took more than his share, enough to last him for days if he kept it hidden. Ruth was the one who caught him. She'd been watching, always watching. He looked up at her, eyes wide, guilt already crawling across his face. I thought I could get away with it." "You thought?" Ruth's voice was quiet, deadly. "You stole food. From everyone here." The group had gathered, drawn by the noise. Some of them were just as hungry, just as desperate. And now they all knew. A murmur ran through the crowd. "Come on, Ruth," one of them said, a woman with a sharp tone. "We can't turn on each other like this. We're all in the same boat." Ruth's eyes narrowed. "This is not just a mistake. This is survival. He put all of us at risk." Another tourist, a man who'd joined the rebellion the previous night, stepped forward. "So what now? You want to punish him? Throw him out? Starve him?" Ruth didn't flinch. "He took food. He will answer for it." "Punishment?" the man sneered. "You're treating us like soldiers, Ruth. Like we're just your squad. You don't have to be a dictator to survive." Ruth's voice dropped, the edge sharpening. "I'm not here to be liked. I'm here to keep us alive." The man bristled, his jaw tightening. "Well, you're not exactly inspiring us to follow orders." The group fell into uneasy silence. The man who had stolen the food stood there, the guilt evident in his eyes. Everyone was looking at Ruth now. The others were divided. Some whispered in her favor. Others shifted uncomfortably, resenting the authority she wielded. "Do we throw him out?" one asked. "Make an example of him?" "No," Ruth said firmly. "But there will be consequences. Discipline is what keeps us alive. Any break in that could mean the end for all of us." She turned to the thief, her voice like steel. "You're not getting more than your share. You'll do the work. Help with the fire. Help everyone else." The night fell heavy over the lodge. The storm outside didn't ease. It only grew stronger, its rage tearing at the windows as if it wanted to drag everything inside the building out into its frozen jaws. Inside, the group huddled, trying to sleep, trying to pretend the gnawing cold wasn't there. But something was wrong. It wasn't the wind that made the walls creak louder, or the eerie sound of snow scraping against the roof. It was the silence that filled the space, the silence of a group that had already fractured too many times. The air was thick with suspicion. Everyone had a secret now. And then, a scream. Someone had gotten up in the middle of the night. It was the sound of a door slamming open, followed by frantic shouts. The generator! The only thing that kept them warm, the one source of light they had. Someone had tampered with it. In the darkness, the fire that had been feeding the engine sputtered and died. The room plunged into bitter cold, the sound of the storm outside amplifying the panic inside. Ruth shot up from her spot near the fire. She knew what this was. Sabotage. Who did this? Ruth's voice cut through the growing chaos, cold and calm. Who touched the generator? Everyone looked around, faces illuminated by the dull glow of the emergency lanterns. No one met her eyes. "Don't just stand there," Ruth snapped, scanning the room. "We need to find who did this." It didn't take long before Ruth's instincts kicked in. The sabotage wasn't random. It was calculated. Someone had done this deliberately, trying to kill them all in the dead of night. She started with the loudest voices, the ones who had spoken out against her from the beginning. There had been one, a man who had persistently questioned her authority. He was always the first to call her orders military nonsense, the first to suggest they should do it their own way. He wasn't hard to find. He was near the corner of the room, nervously pacing. The others were whispering, eyeing him with growing suspicion. Ruth approached him slowly. Her eyes never left his. "You did it, didn't you?" Her voice was a low, dangerous whisper. He stiffened, but he didn't deny it. Instead, his eyes hardened. "It was your fault. This whole situation. None of us should be here. You're dragging us down." Ruth leaned in, close enough for him to feel the heat of her breath. "You tried to kill us all. You tried to leave us in the cold. Don't you understand? You've signed our death warrants." He scoffed, a small, bitter laugh escaping him. "You think you're some kind of god? I was trying to save us from you." The others were watching, silent, holding their breaths. Ruth's gaze bore into him, unflinching. "No," Ruth replied, her voice soft yet full of finality. "You signed our death sentence. But I haven't accepted it yet." The man's face twisted in frustration, but Ruth didn't flinch. She wasn't here to punish him. She was here to keep them alive. And she would, no matter what. She turned and walked away, her posture unwavering. The room was still tense, but Ruth was resolute. She had no time for petty vengeance. But the truth had been revealed. A traitor was among them. And now, they all knew the cost of betrayal. The cold wasn't just from the storm outside. The night stretched on, the storm outside unrelenting. The wind howled like a wounded animal, throwing snow and ice against the windows with such force that they seemed to bend under the pressure. Inside, the air was thick with the weight of their collective dread. The cold had set in deep, gnawing at them, creeping into their bones like the storm itself. In the dim light of the emergency lanterns, a few of the tourists were huddled together, speaking in hushed tones, but there was an edge of panic to their voices now. They were all starting to crack. One woman, barely able to hold herself upright, was muttering incoherently to herself. Her hands trembled as she clutched at her jacket, her eyes wide and unseeing. I saw her in the snow. She was calling to me, asking for help. Who? Someone asked, but the woman didn't answer. She was beyond reason now, lost in some hallucination brought on by the cold. Her breath was shallow, quick, as if the very air had become poisonous. Another man, shaking violently, had collapsed by the fire. His face was pale, his lips blue, but the worst part was his eyes, glassy and unseeing, as if he was staring into another world. Tears streamed down his face, and he was sobbing uncontrollably, without any hint of stopping. I can't do this any more." His voice cracked, thick with despair. "Please, someone, please make it stop. I don't want to die here." The group watched him in silence, their faces twisted with a mix of sympathy and fear. They were all on the edge now, just barely holding on to their sanity. Ruth stood, a silent sentinel at the center of it all. She had been walking from one person to the next, offering comfort, her words firm and steady. But even she wasn't immune to the suffocating weight of the storm. She couldn't shake the feeling that this was a battle she couldn't win. No matter how hard she tried, the cold kept coming, the despair too thick to break through. She could see it in their eyes. This was no longer just a physical battle. It was a mental one too. As she walked past one of the windows, she caught her reflection in the glass, a ghostly version of herself, staring back at her with hollow eyes. For a split second, it wasn't the storm that she saw, but the past. Her past. The memories hit her like a wave, the flood of emotions impossible to hold back. A flash of her daughter's face, the little girl she had failed to save. Her mission, her last mission, had gone wrong. So wrong. She had been trained to save lives, but on that fateful day, she hadn't been able to save the one person who mattered most. The weight of that failure had never left her. And now, in the heart of this blizzard, it was suffocating her. She clenched her fists, trying to push the memory away, but it lingered. Her daughter's voice, soft and pleading, echoed in her mind. "Mom, help me." Ruth's heart clenched. She couldn't save them all. Not now. Not in this hellhole of ice and snow. But she had to try. For them. For herself. She turned back to the group, her face hardening, the mask of the leader slipping back into place. They couldn't see her weakness. They couldn't know her demons. "Stay close," she said, her voice a quiet command. "We're going to make it through this. I won't let this storm take any more of us." The ice outside pressed in, and inside, the cracks were widening, but Ruth refused to let them break. The storm outside raged with an unrelenting fury, the wind howling like a beast locked in battle with the earth itself. Inside the lodge, the flickering light of a single lantern cast long shadows on the walls. Ruth stood at the center of the room, her face set in a grim mask, her eyes narrowed as she studied the maps strewn across the wooden table. The clock was ticking, each second feeling like an eternity. She had a plan. A dangerous, desperate plan, but a plan nonetheless. Ruth's mind worked quickly, retracing the steps of her past. She had been here, in these mountains, 20 years ago. She had led missions across this treacherous terrain, scouting the high altitudes, setting up communications, and overseeing emergency operations. There had been a military base in the area then, just a few miles away, hidden in the dense forest. It was small, secretive, but it was enough, a place that could provide warmth, shelter, and most importantly, food. Her memory was sharp. Her mind, a labyrinth of maps, coordinates, and strategies honed over decades of service. She remembered the way the snow piled in these mountains, the way the wind howled through the valleys, and how the terrain shifted under the weight of a storm like the one they were trapped in now. She knew the terrain. She could navigate it blindfolded if she had to. But time was slipping away. Every passing hour, the cold seeped deeper into their bones, and hunger gnawed at them, harder than the wind. "It's 5 kilometers through chaos," Ruth said, her voice calm but low, the weight of her words heavy in the thick, suffocating silence. 5 kilometers through the worst of the storm. If we can reach the base, we'll be safe. There was a murmur in the room, the tourists exchanging uneasy glances. Fear had settled into their hearts, but Ruth's words carried a strange sense of authority. She wasn't just telling them what needed to be done. She was showing them a way out. But she wasn't asking anyone to follow her. Not yet. "I need volunteers," she said, the steel in her voice unmistakable. "This isn't an order. This is a request. But it's the only shot we've got." She waited, her eyes scanning the room, locking onto each face. The group was silent, the weight of their decision pressing down on them. The cold outside felt closer, as if it were creeping into the very walls of the lodge. The uncertainty was suffocating. Finally, 2 men stood. One was the same man who had been the loudest in his dissent, his voice always the first to question Ruth's authority. He was a lawyer from New York, sharp, analytical, but fearful of the unknown. The other, a younger man, a mechanic from Oregon, had been quieter since the storm had begun, his face pale, but his eyes determined. The room fell still as they stepped forward, and Ruth gave them a single nod. There was no need for words. They were going, and it was likely they wouldn't return. The finality of it was almost suffocating. Ruth's heart clenched. She had been a leader her entire life, trained to make decisions that affected the lives of others. But this felt different. She hadn't led anyone into something like this before, not with lives so precariously balanced. "Take care of each other," she said, her voice soft but steady. "And if you don't make it back, I'll make sure they know you died trying to save us." It wasn't much, but it was all she had. The 2 men nodded, both carrying the weight of their own fears, their own hopes, their own destinies. They walked toward the door, and for a moment the lodge seemed to hold its breath. As they disappeared into the darkness, Ruth exhaled slowly, the chill of the air seeping into her own chest. There was no turning back now. The hours passed in agonizing silence. Outside, the storm's fury never waned. Inside the lodge, the flickering light of the lantern cast long, wavering shadows that stretched across the walls like dark tendrils. The fire in the hearth burned low, the crackling logs now a distant whisper against the roar of the wind. But the real noise was inside, tension simmering, building, boiling over. The 2 men who had volunteered to venture into the storm had been gone for hours, then a day, and still nothing. No sound. Nothing but the howl of the wind outside, the constant, unyielding drone of the blizzard, and the sinking feeling of despair creeping through the group like a sickness. Every few minutes someone would stand, staring out the small window, searching the white horizon for any sign of movement, any shape, any flicker that could be a figure, a glimpse of hope. But there was nothing. The silence began to press against them, thick and suffocating. Time itself seemed to stretch into infinity, and the air in the lodge grew heavier. The cold gnawed at their bones, the hunger tore at their resolve, and the isolation suffocated them. "I told you this was a death trap," one man muttered, his voice breaking through the stillness. His words were like a spark to dry tinder. "She sent them out to die, didn't she? They're never coming back." A murmur of agreement swept through the room, low and anxious, like a storm cloud gathering force. Ruth stood by the window, her back to the group, her expression unreadable. She hadn't spoken much since the men had left. What was there to say? She could feel their doubts, their growing panic. But her own thoughts were far more urgent. Maybe they're lost. Maybe they're just waiting for the storm to pass. Someone ventured weakly, trying to hold on to hope, but the voice wavered with uncertainty. The others were having none of it. Waiting for what? Another man spat, his voice rising. For help that'll never come? We're trapped here. We're going to freeze to death in this damn hole, and she sent them out like bait. Don't you see it? Another voice joined in, then another, until the room was full of muttered accusations, growing louder by the minute. The storm outside became a distant, irrelevant noise as the storm inside the lodge gathered strength. "They're dead," the lawyer from New York said, his voice filled with bitterness. "They're all dead, and you let them go. You let them walk right into the storm, Ruth. You knew this would happen." Ruth turned slowly, her eyes cold, her face hard as granite. She met his gaze, unflinching. "They knew what they were doing," she said quietly, her voice steady but edged with something colder. "They knew the risks. This wasn't a decision I made for them. This was their choice." But her words fell on deaf ears. The distrust had spread like wildfire, and now it wasn't just a few individuals whispering their doubts. It was the entire group. A voice rang out, louder this time, a woman who had been quiet until now. "You lied to us. You sent them to die, and you're not even going after them." The accusation hung in the air, sharp and venomous. Ruth's heart pounded in her chest, but her face betrayed nothing. She had led men and women through hell before, through situations much darker and more dangerous than this one. She had made the hard decisions before. But this was different. "You think I don't care?" she snapped, her voice cutting through the tension. "You think I don't know the risk? You think I don't feel the weight of their lives on my shoulders every second? I'm not just here to save you. I'm here to make sure we all make it out of this alive. But I need you to trust me. All of you." But the trust was gone. Like the light of the lantern, it flickered and dimmed, then snuffed out. Someone threw something at her. A bottle. It shattered against the wall, the sound echoing like a gunshot. The group was breaking apart. The quiet had turned to chaos. It didn't take long for the whispers to grow louder, more insistent. The group was slipping further into chaos, and now there was someone bold enough to step forward, someone willing to challenge Ruth. It started with quiet mutterings, then accusations, and finally someone made a move. A man, broad-shouldered and angry, pushed past the others and stormed toward Ruth. His eyes were wild with panic and desperation. "You've lost us all," he shouted, his voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "This is it, Ruth. We're going to die here, and you've led us to it. I'm not going to wait around for you to decide if we live or die." Before anyone could react, he grabbed her arm with force, yanking her away from the window where she had been standing, watching the storm outside. Ruth didn't flinch, didn't fight him. Her face remained impassive, but her mind raced. She knew this was coming. It always did. In the face of terror, people needed someone to blame. "You're making a mistake," she said, her voice calm but steady. "We've had enough of your plans," the man spat back. "We're taking control now." With a grunt, he shoved her toward the small storage room at the back of the lodge. Her muscles tensed, but she made no move to resist as he slammed the door behind her, locking it. "Let her out," a voice called, but the others were already moving, forming a circle of distrust around her. Some of them cheered, emboldened by the shift in power. Others looked on, their eyes uncertain, fearful. Inside the dark room, Ruth's breath slowed, her thoughts sharpening. She knew she was running out of time. But she'd survived worse, much worse, than a mutiny in a lodge. Outside, the chaos continued. The man who had taken charge, his name was Thomas, stepped forward and took control. His face was flushed with anger, his eyes wide with the adrenaline of his newfound authority. "We're getting out of here," he shouted. "We'll push through together, and we'll find help." The group, those who had been too terrified to act before, now followed him, clinging to hope that a new plan would work. But Ruth had been right. They didn't have a plan. They didn't know how bad it was. They made it barely a kilometer before the storm closed in on them. The blizzard swallowed them whole, a relentless wall of snow and ice that pushed back against their every step. The wind howled like an angry beast, the cold sinking into their bones. Within minutes, they were lost, scattered, stumbling in the thickening snow. One man fell behind, slipping and tumbling into a snowdrift. The others tried to pull him out, but the storm was too fierce. The snow piled up too fast. It was as if the mountain was devouring them whole, one by one. "Keep moving," Thomas barked, his voice cracking with fear. But no one listened. They couldn't. The cold was too much. The storm was too powerful. Panic spread quickly, seizing them, turning them against one another. The group fractured, and one by one, the first casualties began to fall. A scream echoed through the howling wind. It was quickly swallowed by the storm, but they all heard it. The man who had fallen behind had disappeared into the snow, never to be seen again. The mutiny had cost them their first victim. The storm had claimed him. The storm had been relentless, tearing at the windows of the lodge with a fury no one had ever expected. Days had passed since the mutiny, and in that time the situation had grown increasingly dire. Food was running out. People were growing desperate. It was as if the mountain itself was trying to swallow them whole, to erase their existence from the face of the earth. Then, through the howling wind and snow, came the sound of the door opening. It was slow at first, barely perceptible against the storm. But then the door creaked louder, and in the doorway stood two figures, haggard, frostbitten, but alive. The room fell silent. At first, no one moved. They were too stunned to speak. "Ruth?" one voice whispered, too weak to believe it could be true. But it wasn't Ruth. Not yet. The two figures stumbled in, barely able to stay on their feet. One of them was carrying a heavy pack, and the other, a man, was leaning on the first for support. He was covered in frost, his face pale, lips cracked. The pack dropped with a heavy thud, and the man collapsed to his knees, gasping for breath. "They found it," the woman said, her voice raspy from the cold. "The base. It's real. There's a radio, a rescue signal." It took a moment for the words to sink in. The man, now on the floor, was shaking, his fingers twitching uncontrollably, the signs of severe hypothermia evident in his ashen skin. But there was something more important than that now. The radio. The group, weak and exhausted, gathered around them, eyes wide with disbelief. Hope, for the first time in days, began to rise. The woman, who had been one of the 2 volunteers to brave the storm, looked exhausted, her own body barely able to hold itself upright. But her words were the promise of salvation. "There's a radio," she repeated, her breath coming in short, labored gasps. "But the battery, it's down to 10 minutes. Maybe less. We need to make it count." A heavy silence fell over the group, and then, like the crack of thunder, the realization hit them. This was it. The last chance they had. The only chance. The door to the storage room creaked open, and Ruth stepped out, her face hard and set like granite. Her eyes scanned the room briefly, taking in the mess of panic and fear that had consumed the others. But that was all in the past now. Without a word, she crossed the room, knelt beside the radio, and took the device into her hands. Her fingers moved swiftly, purposefully, as she powered it on, assessing the situation with a practiced eye. "This is our last shot," she said, her voice low and controlled, but carrying a weight of authority. She didn't need to raise her voice any more. The others had learned that lesson long ago. There was a click, a static noise, then silence. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the crackling sound of a voice on the other end of the line. "We're listening," Ruth said, steady and calm, as if they weren't trapped in a remote lodge on the brink of death. "This is Ruth Harrison, 72nd Rescue Unit. Do you copy?" Her breath came in shallow bursts as she waited for the response. The seconds stretched out like hours, the group holding its breath. And then, through the static, a voice broke through, faint but clear. "Ruth Harrison, we hear you. We'll get help. Stay strong." Hope flooded the room like a tidal wave. "We have contact," Ruth said quietly, a thin smile playing at the corner of her lips. "Now we wait. But we've made it. We're going home." The storm still raged outside, but for the first time in days, the weight of the cold seemed to lift, if only slightly. They had a chance now, a real chance. Ruth had kept her cool. She had led them through hell. And now, they were finally going to survive. The night had fallen again, but this time, the dark didn't seem quite so oppressive. The wind howled as it had before, but the storm no longer felt like a force of nature trying to swallow them whole. No, this time, it was just another obstacle in the path of survival. And now, for the first time in days, they had something to cling to, hope. Ruth sat quietly by the radio, her fingers resting lightly on the dial as the static crackled in the background. The voice from the other end of the line had been faint, distant, but clear enough to understand. Help was coming. It would take 12 hours, 12 long, terrifying hours, but it was coming. The helicopter was on its way. In the faint glow of a dying fire, the others were huddled together in the far corner, some wrapped in blankets, others staring at the ceiling, their eyes wide with fatigue. There was a quiet tension in the room. The storm raged outside, still unrelenting, but now they knew it would end. They had survived this long. They could make it through one more night. But survival, as they all knew by now, didn't come without its cost. Suddenly, the room was shaken by a loud crash, followed by the sickening sound of metal scraping against stone. The ceiling above the kitchen caved in, sending a shower of debris across the floor. Panic erupted as dust and splinters filled the air. People screamed, scrambling for safety, but there was no place left to go. Ruth was on her feet before anyone could process what had happened. Her movements were sharp, controlled, as she grabbed one of the heavier beams of wood and began to clear the wreckage. "Get back!" she shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Make space. We need to move quickly." For a moment, it seemed like everything was falling apart again. The walls groaned under the weight of the storm, and the bitter cold was creeping back in. But this time, there was no panicked shouting, no blaming, no fear-driven madness. This time, everyone worked together. The group moved as one, hauling pieces of debris away from the wreckage, the flickering firelight casting long, wavering shadows across the room. Ruth barked orders with a calm authority that settled into the group like an anchor. They didn't question her any more. They couldn't. Not after everything she had done for them. As the kitchen slowly began to clear, the once strong sense of dread that had clouded their minds started to lift. It wasn't just that the roof had fallen in. It was the way they had handled it. They had worked together. They had done something right for once. Ruth stood at the front, keeping watch over the group as they patched the walls, repaired what they could, and made sure the fire didn't die. Her face was lined with exhaustion, but there was a quiet strength there, something unshakable. "We make it through this, we get out of here," she said softly, her voice steady. "One more night. We've got this." It wasn't a question. It wasn't even a reassurance. It was a statement of fact. Ruth didn't offer comfort. She didn't have time for that. But what she did offer was something far more important: leadership. And the group responded to her strength. Slowly, they began to believe it too. They could survive. They would survive. The storm outside continued to howl, but the group inside the lodge was no longer afraid. They were tired. They were battered. But they had hope. And that, in the end, was all they really needed to get through the night. The storm had finally stopped. It was as though the world itself had exhaled. The snow, which had pounded the lodge for days, had ceased its assault. The howling winds, the suffocating cold, they had all faded into an eerie, calm silence. The air was still thick with the smell of damp wood and sweat, the scent of survival hanging in the now quiet space. For a moment, no one spoke. They stood together, their eyes blinking in the weak morning light that filtered through the narrow windows. The wind had stilled, but the cold had not. The walls of the lodge were battered and broken, the roof barely intact, but in the distance the unmistakable sound of a helicopter's blades reached their ears. Hope. The sound grew louder, and with it came the flutter of excitement, the pulse of adrenaline. They had made it. After everything, the hunger, the cold, the betrayals, the panic, they had survived. But not all of them. There were fewer people now, fewer faces to count. Some had been lost to the cold, others to their own desperation. It was the harsh truth of survival. Not everyone was strong enough to make it. The storm had taken its toll. But for those who remained, the ones who had listened when it mattered, the ones who had followed Ruth's lead, they stood as proof of the strength that could be found when fear was put aside and survival became the only thing that mattered. The helicopter touched down, its powerful blades slicing through the still air, throwing snow in every direction. The sound of the rotor blades drowned out everything else. One by one, the survivors were guided to the aircraft, helped onto the waiting stretcher or simply assisted, their tired, gaunt faces now filled with a quiet relief. The weight of the storm was still fresh in their bones, but they had made it. They were leaving. They were going home. Ruth stood off to the side, watching. Her eyes were fixed on the group, on the faces of the people she had led through the darkest days of their lives. She said nothing. There was no need. She had done what she came to do. As the last few were escorted to the helicopter, one of the survivors, a man who had been with her since the beginning, approached her. His voice was low, almost reverent. You saved us," he said, his eyes full of gratitude. "We wouldn't have made it without you." Ruth gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "I did what had to be done." Her eyes shifted toward the helicopter as it began to lift off, its blades thrumming against the quiet sky. "I won't go back to that storm again," she said, her voice calm but final. "I've seen enough." The man didn't argue. He knew, as they all did, that Ruth had given everything to bring them back. She had led them, and she had kept them alive when it seemed impossible. Without her, they would have been lost. The helicopter rose higher into the sky, the survivors looking down at the wreckage of the lodge below. The storm had passed, but its scars would remain forever. And Ruth had returned to the quiet. She had done her part. Now the storm was behind her, but the ghosts of it would never leave her. She had led them out, but she would never forget the cost. The storm had finally stopped. It was as though the world itself had exhaled. The snow, which had pounded the lodge for days, had ceased its assault. The howling winds, the suffocating cold, they had all faded into an eerie, calm silence. The air was still thick with the smell of damp wood and sweat, the scent of survival hanging in the now quiet space. For a moment, no one spoke. They stood together, their eyes blinking in the weak morning light that filtered through the narrow windows. The wind had stilled, but the cold had not. The walls of the lodge were battered and broken, the roof barely intact, but in the distance the unmistakable sound of a helicopter's blades reached their ears. Hope. The sound grew louder, and with it came the flutter of excitement, the pulse of adrenaline. They had made it. After everything, the hunger, the cold, the betrayals, the panic, they had survived. But not all of them. There were fewer people now, fewer faces to count. Some had been lost to the cold, others to their own desperation. It was the harsh truth of survival. Not everyone was strong enough to make it. The storm had taken its toll. But for those who remained, the ones who had listened when it mattered, the ones who had followed Ruth's lead, they stood as proof of the strength that could be found when fear was put aside and survival became the only thing that mattered. The helicopter touched down, its powerful blades slicing through the still air, throwing snow in every direction. The sound of the rotor blades drowned out everything else. One by one, the survivors were guided to the aircraft, helped onto the waiting stretcher or simply assisted, their tired, gaunt faces now filled with a quiet relief. The weight of the storm was still fresh in their bones, but they had made it. They were leaving. They were going home. Ruth stood off to the side, watching. Her eyes were fixed on the group, on the faces of the people she had led through the darkest days of their lives. She said nothing. There was no need. She had done what she came to do. As the last few were escorted to the helicopter, one of the survivors, a man who had been with her since the beginning, approached her. His voice was low, almost reverent. You saved us," he said, his eyes full of gratitude. "We wouldn't have made it without you." Ruth gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "I did what had to be done." Her eyes shifted toward the helicopter as it began to lift off, its blades thrumming against the quiet sky. "I won't go back to that storm again," she said, her voice calm but final. "I've seen enough." The man didn't argue. He knew, as they all did, that Ruth had given everything to bring them back. She had led them, and she had kept them alive when it seemed impossible. Without her, they would have been lost. The helicopter rose higher into the sky, the survivors looking down at the wreckage of the lodge below. The storm had passed, but its scars would remain forever. And Ruth had returned to the quiet. She had done her part. Now the storm was behind her, but the ghosts of it would never leave her. She had led them out, but she would never forget the cost.